It's a huge, huge statement by India and the European Union. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, made it very clear. She said, "We have done it." She called Prime Minister Narendra Modi, my friend Narendra. The big point that she said, two giants have sealed the deal. We have done it. She's spoken of the future of the relationship. She's spoken of the challenges that will be ahead, but she's also spoken of the achievements. And over the course of the next 1 hour, our Foreign Affairs Editor Geeta Mohan and I, and we'll be joined by Siddharth Zarabi, Managing Editor Business, we'll tell you much more on how significant this India-EU deal is. Remember, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, for a very long time, he said, so near and yet so far. Finally, it's been done. Of course, some legal scrubbing would be required, and we'll tell you the nuts and bolts of it. But before I get you more, let's once again listen in to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, to the President of the European Council, and also to Ursula von der Leyen. Now, you know, Antonio da Costa, he's of Indian origin, and so proudly he showed his overseas Indian card. He's known as the Gandhi of Lisbon. He's been a lawyer by profession, the Prime Minister of Portugal. He's someone who's worked extensively on India-EU ties, and before that, Portugal-India ties. Now, this is finally, as the Prime Minister said, everything was aligned for the 27-member European Union on the 27th of January for the deal to finally be inked. Listen in, I'll get you much more on this big story.
कल एक ऐतिहासिक क्षण था जब पहली बार यूरोपियन यूनियन के लीडर्स भारत के गणतंत्र दिवस समारोह में मुख्य अतिथि के रूप में शामिल हुए। आज एक और ऐतिहासिक अवसर है जब विश्व की दो सबसे बड़ी लोकतांत्रिक शक्तियां अपने संबंधों में एक निर्णायक अध्याय जोड़ रही है। फ्रेंड्स, पिछले कुछ वर्षों में भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन के संबंधों में उल्लेखनीय प्रगति हुई है। साझा लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों, आर्थिक सिनर्जी और मजबूत पीपल टू पीपल टाइज के आधार पर हमारी साझेदारी नई ऊंचाइयों तक पहुंच रही है। आज हमारे बीच 180 बिलियन यूरो का ट्रेड है। 8 लाख से अधिक भारतीय यूरोपियन यूनियन के देशों में रह रहे हैं और सक्रिय योगदान दे रहे हैं। हमने स्ट्रेटेजिक टेक्नोलॉजी से लेकर क्लीन एनर्जी, डिजिटल गवर्नेंस से लेकर डेवलपमेंट पार्टनरशिप, हर क्षेत्र में सहयोग के नए आयाम स्थापित किए हैं। इन्हीं उपलब्धियों के आधार पर आज की समिट में हमने समाज के सभी वर्गों को लाभ पहुंचाने वाले कई निर्णय लिए हैं। फ्रेंड्स, आज भारत ने अपने इतिहास का अब तक का सबसे बड़ा फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट संपन्न किया है। आज 27 तारीख है। ये सुखद संयोग है कि आज ही के दिन यूरोपियन यूनियन के 27 देशों के साथ भारत ये FTA कर रहा है। यह एक ऐतिहासिक समझौता हमारे किसानों, हमारे छोटे उद्योगों, इसके यूरोपियन मार्केट तक पहुंच आसान बनाएगा, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में नए अवसर पैदा करेगा और हमारे सर्विसेज सेक्टर के बीच सहयोग को और प्रबल करेगा। इतना ही नहीं, यह एफटीए भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन के बीच इन्वेस्टमेंट को बूस्ट करेगा, नई इनोवेशन पार्टनरशिप बनाएगा और वैश्विक स्तर पर सप्लाई चेन को मजबूत करेगा। यानी यह सिर्फ ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट नहीं है, यह साझा समृद्धि का नया ब्लूप्रिंट है।
So joining me on this special broadcast is Siddharth Zarabi, Group Editor, Business Today. Also with me is India Today's Foreign Affairs Editor, Geeta Mohan, and Chetan Bhutani, my colleague from Business Today. And we'll talk to our colleagues in greater detail. Siddharth, finally, the deal inked. A long wait, so near yet so far, was something that was said for a very long time. But break it down in nuts and bolts when Ursula von der Leyen says that the second largest economy and the fourth largest economy, when they come together, it benefits both. How does it benefit both, Siddharth?
Well, it is certainly a momentous development, and I must say, Gaurav, that the fact that the EU Commissioner actually announced this in Davos tells us more about why now. I think the why now is more important than what now, because clearly this is a signal to the rest of the world and primarily the United States of America that European Union and India can set aside their possible differences on the nitty-gritty of such a massive trade pact and come together. I think that is the broader signal. It will of course take between 6 to 8 months for the actual implementation of this, because remember, this will now have to go through 27 sovereign states which constitutes the European Union. There is a multi-step process through which it will get approved. Similarly, we will also see some of the fine print before the actual trade document is signed. But what is the big headline number? India has gone the farthest possibly that I can recall in any trade agreement, and it's just in a year that the pendulum for our trade engagement with the world has swung from one extreme to the other extreme. And
so just explain this before I bring in Geeta. Explain this. When you say India has gone as far as India could, break that down for us. How has India gone as far as India could?
Barring dairy and elements of agriculture products, everything has been opened up. I'll just take one example. India's automobile industry, which has over the last 4 decades been built up with a mix of measures and selective foreign investment approvals, and that story starting with Suzuki, and India is now a massive automotive hub. We have even allowed lower duties for up to 250,000 units. This will introduce a sense of competition, but India's automobile sector is now fully mature and therefore we've been able to make concessions. But as far as dairy goes, we haven't. And Gaurav, remember, the European Union deal comes after the one with the British, the one with Oman, the one with New Zealand. And if you take all of them and string it all together, it's very clear, even if the United States trade deal, which has been kept hanging in Washington and not by New Delhi, doesn't happen, it doesn't make a difference. It has sent signals, and that is why you have the US Treasury Secretary making the kind of remarks that he has. I think the important point to note here is, if you see the kind of liberalization that we are offering, I would say it is as momentous as the initial set of first economic reforms in 1991 and thereabouts, when we opened up to the world.
That's a very major point you're making, Siddharth. That's a very major point you're making, that this is a moment as significant as that first liberalization in 1991. And over the course of the next 1 hour, Siddharth, Geeta and I will continue talking about this. We'll bring in more analysts and experts to decode this trade deal. But Geeta, Siddharth raised a very pertinent point. It's not what now, but why now. So what message does this send out to President Donald Trump and his team?
Well, the DC team is watching very closely, monitoring the situation and the deal very closely. Siddharth is very right. It's not about what, but why now. And the fact that he mentioned Ursula von der Leyen having announced this at Davos. It was at Davos that Secretary Bessent also made it a major issue that while they're trying to tariff Russia and Russian oil over here, Europe is going ahead and striking a deal with India. So yes, they are actually quite wary and monitoring very closely as to what is happening over here between India and the European Union. This is also far bigger, Gaurav, is because while we talk about bilateral trade between India and various other countries, free trade agreements that India signed with FTA, one bloc, the United Kingdom, the UAE, but apart from that, these are bilateral in nature. Here we are talking about 27 member states coming together and signing a deal or striking a deal with India. The number in terms of produce, in terms of sectors, and in terms of money is manifold. It is way bigger. So it's a big deal, and that's why when Ursula von der Leyen says it's mother of all deals, it means business, and it means that it is mother of all deals because it's 27 member states. Also in terms of technicalities, while there will be legal scrubbing, the deal is not going to go to individual countries. So you do not require parliamentary consensus and approval from individual countries, but you do require the EU Parliament to approve. That's where this deal is going to go to see a green signal.
Let me bring in Siddharth once again. Siddharth, because you've been tracking the deal even with the United States of America very closely. Way back in July last year, it was said that it was done, almost done, was at President Trump's table, but he wanted more. Once this deal is done and the way India is moving forward, does this send out a signal to America that there is a realignment taking place, and does this appear to be a wider realignment with signal to other countries in the world?
Remember, this is a deal with the European Union, which is also, as we speak, continuing to buy Russian crude oil and gas. Why has the United States kept a deal pending with India? Is it personal ego? Is it the rantings of key advisors and some stories that have appeared over the past couple of days? I don't think the United States approached a deal with India with the purpose of a deal in mind. And look what other nations are going through, Gaurav, where despite having signed deals, President Trump wakes up and hits one nation with a fresh round of tariffs after a deal that was signed way back in July. So frankly, I think India has very clearly moved ahead of a deal with the United States. There are sectors that have taken a hit, and that hit will continue for the near term, for the short term. But once the European Union deal kicks in and the other deals that we have just spoken about on the show, you will see a cumulative fast forwarding of India's exports. And that, I think, is the real signal that our dependence on the United States as one of the largest trading partners is going to get reduced, if not immediately, but in the medium term.
Interesting, you should point that out. And Siddharth, stay with me. Geeta, stay with me. I have Professor Brahma Chellaney also joining me on the broadcast. Siddharth is with us. Chetan Bhutani is with us. Professor Chellaney, how do you look at a deal which Ursula von der Leyen, even in Davos, described as the mother of all deals? And right now she says, we've done it. The second and the fourth largest economies, they've come together. It will benefit both India and the European Union bloc. Who does this benefit more, sir?
Gaurav, looking at it geopolitically, this is a major deal. It's a historic pivot in global trade. Given the scale, they're creating a trade corridor representing 25% of global GDP and 1/3 of global trade. So by any reckoning, this is a major deal. And especially given the era of trade wars and sharpening great power competition and rivalries, the fact is that the EU is doing exactly what Indian foreign policy has sought to do, which is to underpin strategic autonomy. Finally, the EU, instead of actually pressing India to join the Western Bloc, is coming round to recognizing that in today's world, you have to be multi-aligned, which is that you have to, because power is diffused. So you have to go out of your own bloc and build partnerships and alignments This is what the EU is signaling by signing this FTA with India. And the bottom line is that this agreement transforms the relationship with India from a transactional partnership into a strategic pillar of the 21st century global trade. But there's one caveat, Gaurav, that we tend to ignore. In fact, we obscure because we think that any trade deal, especially any FTA, will be hugely beneficial to India. Yes, to some extent, this India-EU trade deal will aid India's economic growth story.
Yes.
But India is a very different economy than the countries or the EU as a bloc.
Because we consume a lot that we make.
No, there's the very important thing, which is that India is not an export-driven economy.
Yes.
The EU is very much an export-driven economy. The FTAs India has signed with, for example, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand.
Absolutely.
In all these countries, these are all export-driven economies. India is an import-dependent economy. India's imports are far higher than its exports. So when you open up your market to the exports of others, you do come under pressure to some extent.
Unless we innovate and export more, and we'll talk about this in greater detail. Sir, stay with me for a moment, because there's, Ursula von der Leyen, the manner in which she called this the mother of all deals, and why, in her view, are these just words or is there more? We'll continue to decode this, but just listen in to Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission.
Prime Minister Modi, dear friend, 1 year ago the full College of Commissioners came to India. You mentioned it. And this is also a very special memory for me. It showed the seriousness of our intent and the strength of our commitment. Today we reap the fruits of that commitment with our historic summit. And let me start with trade. Prime Minister, distinguished friend, we did it. We delivered the mother of all deals. We are creating a market of 2 billion people. And this is the tale of two giants, the world's second and fourth largest economies. Two giants who choose partnership in a true win-win fashion. A strong message that cooperation is the best answer to global challenges. This trade will integrate further our supply chain and strengthen our joint manufacturing power. It will cut up to 4 billion euros in annual tariffs for exporters of all sizes. And it will create good jobs for millions of workers here in India and in Europe. At the same time, this agreement will build on the natural complementarity of our economies. It brings together Indian skills, services, and scale with Europe's technology, capital, and innovation. It will create levels of growth that neither side can achieve alone. And by combining these strengths, we reduce strategic dependencies at a time when trade is increasingly weaponized. We will discuss this and more at our first EU-India Business Forum later today.
Also very interesting was Ursula von der Leyen referring to Makar Sankranti, Surya in Uttarayan, and moving from darkness unto light when she spoke of the India-EU free trade agreement. Interesting that she should mention when it comes to India, it's all about skill, it's all about scale, it's all about service sector. But when it comes to Europe, it's all about their technology, it's about innovation, it's about funding. And when they come together, they complement each other. Let me bring in our Foreign Affairs Editor, Geeta Mohan, to respond to what Brahma Chellaney, Professor Brahma Chellaney had just raised Geeta, and I would, get Brahma Chellaney also on board. He said, yes, there's a gain for India, but India consumes a lot of what we manufacture. We will be importing more. Is there an opportunity for India to perhaps make more and export more after this, Geeta?
Well, there is going to be increase in export as well, because increase not in terms of how we manufacture increase that, but because of the tariffs that we are suffering from the United States of America, there is a lot of product where we really need we need markets for, and Europe is going to become markets for that. There is about 6.4 lakh crore export boost that we could be looking at, according to the Ministry of Commerce, Minister of Commerce particularly. We're looking at textile, electronics, automobiles, sports products, a lot of things that are manufactured in India. Most of the textile used to go to America as well, but because of the tariffs and because of how our economy and these small businesses are hit, this opens up as an opportunity, not just for them to have alternative to send their products to, but also to manufacture more, to scale up, and to look at maybe manufacturing other products, which is where the Make in India concept really comes in.
Okay.
We do know that, in Make in India, when it comes to the defense sector, India has been lagging behind, although there have been a lot of promises that have been made, but there are many sectors where this opens up an opportunity.
So, more technology comes in. Chetan Bhutani now joins us, and Chetan has been speaking to officials on both sides on this trade deal. And Chetan, is there excitement, or yes, a trade deal has been signed, symbolically a message goes out, but now the legal, pruning, the cleaning up, all of that will take another 6 to 8 months, maybe 2027 is what we're looking at. What is the time frame that we're looking at, Chetan?
Well, Gaurav, you're completely right. But the particular legislature requires to be approved by both houses of the parliament. Of course, that would take 8 to 10 months. But, devil lies in the detail. As per the Ministry of Commerce's, tweets that we are observing, India has secured the most favored nation status for the CBAM, which is the carbon border adjusted mechanism, wherein if India achieves that, the particular requirement for Indian companies to pay higher duties and higher taxes reduces significantly. Currently, EU taxes very hefty duties on countries who are exporting to the EU, which are particularly causing pollution. But yes, India has secured the MFN status, which literally gives India an advantage. To your question on what is the excitement and on the particular sectors, what are really impacted with, first of all, we would see 144, 52 sectors which India opens its markets to the EU. We would also see a 17% leather and leather products duty going to zero. That means EU gets 100% preferential access for India's gems and jewellery sector. In fact, financial support will also be given to meet the CBAM norms to Indian companies, which is of course a great news coming in, and indeed a significant part when it comes to mention that it is a mother of all deals. Of course, $100 billion getaway for the India-EU trade opportunities only in the leather and the footwear market, because we see a whole lot of developments going on in these particular sectors as well. Of course, for the EU, it's a $572 billion market that's been unlocked. Slash tariffs on Make in India products would definitely be coming into effect when, of course, the houses of the respective country, gets, ratified. But the bigger news that's also coming in, apart from the CBAM, is, of course, on the medical devices. Cheaper, affordable healthcare, EU's master technologies in medical space coming to India. We would also see medical powerhouses being developed in Maharashtra, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana, and supply chain leaders will also be developed.
Okay, Surabhi, are there niggles that India, should be aware of? What are pitfalls in this journey ahead?
As of now, it seems that most issues in the India-EU negotiations have been completed. But of course, the EU also has very strict health and phytosanitary guidelines, which all Indian exports will have to continue meeting. So this is a tough one for India. Also, we have to keep going forward and seeing how the CBAM guidelines actually come into effect. And yes, there's also wait time, which will take some time, at least 6 to 8 months for the negotiation and the FTA to be operationalized. Remember, we signed the India-UK FTA last year, but that FTA also still needs to be implemented. So these are 3 or 4 points where we still have to see how it goes.
Okay,
But
let me quickly bring in Pranay Upadhyay. Pranay Upadhyay joins us from Hyderabad House where this deal was inked. Pranay, the optics were all perfect. In fact, right from the time that the EU delegation arrived in India, we saw what was happening at Kartavya Path, at the at-home at Rashtrapati Bhavan, at Hyderabad House. But is there excitement that this will give the boost that's required, especially in this uncertain international environment? This is perhaps stability that Ursula von der Leyen speaks of.
Absolutely, Gaurav. And as they say in Hindi, that it's der aaye durust aaye kind of a deal. Because this deal actually gives a win-win proposition for both India and EU. And we have seen at Hyderabad House, how Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal was seen hugging the European delegation leader and congratulating the European Union delegation after the conclusion of India-EU talks. How European Union President, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned about the Uttarayan and Makar Sankranti. So this clearly shows that, Europe is looking at the silver lining at this turbulent time towards India, and they are finding a ray of hope in India and with this partnership, and that's why it is termed as the mother of all deal. Why and how this is called mother of all deals? Not in terms of the numbers and statistic that we are looking at around 2 billion population, or we are looking at a quarter of the global GDP, or like 1/3 of the international trade. This is a partnership between world's second largest economy and world's fourth largest economy, which is India. This is the partnership which is based on shared values and democratic values, and also this is a partnership which brings a win-win combination, because India is a human resource intensive country, human resource rich country, wherein Europe needs human resource. Indian talents will find their way to Europe, and for that European Union President Ursula von der Leyen clearly mentioned that EU is going to establish a gateway EU legal hub and facilitation centers in Europe, in India. And also, they will establish the India-EU innovation hubs in India. So clearly, they are looking at a long-term partnership, not in terms of only goods and services or a trade, but rather EU Commissioner Antonio Costa said that EU is looking at ensuring EU security or Europe's security in this partnership with India.
Security partnership is also extremely significant when it comes to the defense and security agreement between the two countries, and Geeta Mohan will tell us more about that on India First at 8 this evening. This is where we'll also talk about why piracy on the high seas, because that is where global trade and commerce, ensuring sea lanes of communication remain open, very significant. Cyber terrorism is something, it's not just a crime now. Cyber terrorism is something that the world is looking at. Space cooperation is something that the two blocks are thinking of moving forward. But I bring in Professor Brahma, Chellaney and Geeta Mohan once again into this conversation. There are many automobile lovers in this country who couldn't buy perhaps a Mercedes-Benz or an Audi or a BMW. Well, your time could be coming now. What will be cheaper? Luxury cars, and this is systematically going to get cheaper. Your BMW, your Mercedes-Benz, your Audi, your Land Rovers, even the supercars, if you're into supercars like Lamborghini or Maserati or Porsche. But it's not just these real niche cars. The cars that of course, that are already being manufactured in India, like Skoda and Volkswagen, these vehicles will also now be cheaper because duties will go down. How does this impact the Indian automobile market? The appreciation is that the Indian automobile market has been protected for fairly long. It's done extremely well. A lot of Indian cars are also being exported. So they will be able to, fight this out, and the consumer gets the best that's available. So everyone will aspire to give you the best that's available in the market. I want to bring in Professor Brahma Chellaney into this conversation. Professor Chellaney, is this also an opportunity for India to get a lot of technology from the West, especially from Europe? Europe also wants, especially post-COVID, that their reliance on China, it costs them, it costs the world. So if India develops as a manufacturing hub, it's a win-win, sir.
You're absolutely right, Gaurav. For India, it reduces dependency on both the US and China. And for India, that is very important because India is very vulnerable because of these dependencies on two players, one of them being India's adversary, China, and the other being led by a whimsical president, the United States. Now, under this FTA, cooperation on AI, semiconductors, and cyber security is expected to accelerate, linking Europe's high-tech inputs with India's massive scale. Of course, India also benefits in other ways. For example, the deal creates a framework for India to navigate the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, potentially offering green transition grace periods for India's steel and cement. But I think the significance of this deal lies in the geopolitical messaging. It positions the EU and India as a democratic counterweight to the China-centric trade model, while also blunting America's Trump-driven weaponized trade strategy. And as you mentioned, Gaurav, that along with the FTA, the two sides have signed a security and defense partnership. This is rare for the EU to sign such a security and defense partnership, and it marks a shift toward maritime security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and potential joint defense manufacturing.
So where do you see that potential joint defense manufacturing? With France, we've been looking at the Rafales, and India-France strategic partnership has been extremely strong. With Germany, there was the HDW deal in the past. They're looking at Scorpions. They're looking at submarines once again. Scorpions with France in the past, and HDW with Germany. But where else do you see this move forward?
First, you have to keep in mind, Gaurav, that the EU is a very highly export-dependent economy.
Yes.
And it has run out of markets. India was the last market that it needed to tap. The same holds good for defense manufacturing. If German or French defense industries need to expand or even to stay afloat, they need to enter into deals with an important market like India. That's where the potential is, that given the fact that India is now in a period where it has opened up its defense sector to the private players.
100%, yeah.
These players in France or Germany or elsewhere in Europe now have a major market to tap. That's where the potential is. And time will tell whether the EU is able to tap the Indian market in a major way.
So before I bring in Geeta Mohan and Siddharth Zarabi, and give me 30 seconds, Geeta, will it be more of the same in terms of what is known in defense parlance, Professor Brahma Chellaney, as getting in CKDs and SKDs, or completely knocked down and semi-knocked down kits from the European bloc, putting it together in India and then selling it as Make in India, Professor Chellaney? Or do we see genuine technology transfer and manufacturing in India, high-end defense technology manufacturing in India?
Indian government, to what extent it's willing to enforce this core interest of the country. Because if the Indian government is more into showcasing how the EU and India have expanded trade, then the core interest can get bypassed. It's very important for India that if India is to become a great power, in a true sense, that it should develop a strong domestic defense industrial base.
Absolutely.
That is only possible if India does not lose sight of its core interests.
And let me bring in Geeta Mohan, because Geeta, you and Siddharth were talking very extensively about why the timing is very crucial. Professor Chellaney, stay with me. I want all our guests to stay with me as we talk about timing. Is America, Geeta, in your view, and since you're watching this very closely and tracking the American leg also, are they likely now to see light of day, or could they then threaten more taxes either on India or on the European Union, or now we've cushioned ourselves effectively, both India and the European Union?
Well, I'm expecting a sharp reaction from DC, Gaurav. The reactions came in at Davos itself, where Secretary Bessent had made it very clear that they were the ones who were fighting the good war against Russia by imposing tariffs, and it's Europe that went ahead and behind their back struck a deal with India. So, and he's repeated that yesterday as well in an interview. So I expect a sharp reaction coming in from DC at around 5:30 p.m., which is early morning, the wee hours in America. But will it just be a reaction or also an action against India's announcement is something we'll have to wait and see. Whether if we've cushioned ourselves enough is something, again, we'll have to wait and see, because nobody's, I mean, everybody's feeling the brunt of the weaponization of tariffs by the United States of America. And yes, all countries, including Europe and India, are engaged in ensuring that there is a deal that they can strike with the US. India was hoping for an early deal, did not come through. The India-EU FTA has come through. But again, I'm expecting a sharp reaction here.
Okay. Listening to Ursula von der Leyen on why defense cooperation is also very important, that Professor Brahma Chellaney also described as something which is really unique. India-EU defense and security cooperation agreement. Listen into Ursula von der Leyen.
Prime Minister, distinguished friend, we're not only making our economy stronger, we're also delivering security for our people in an increasingly insecure world. And today, the world's two largest economies and democracies launched their first ever security and defense partnership. This is a landmark departure and a trust-based platform for cooperation on the strategic issues that matter most. In doing so, we will help to build each other's resilience. Europe and India have a long history of cooperation in the defense industry. Now we will enhance this teamwork even further. We will deepen our cooperation on maritime security, for example, joint naval exercises to tackle piracy. And we will step up our work on countering cyber and hybrid threats, which are getting more sophisticated by the day. And our partnership includes a dedicated dialogue on space security, from situational awareness to secure connectivity, and stronger cooperation on counterterrorism. Finally, we are launching negotiations on a security of information agreement. Europe and India have chosen to be reliable partners to one another, and this is how we demonstrate the trust we share. 2 weeks ago, India marked Makar Sankranti. It's the beginning of Uttarayan, the sun's northward journey. From darkness to light, from stillness to growth, from what was to what can be. And that is what makes our summit so unique and timely. The time is right for renewal, for fresh momentum, and for opening a new chapter in EU-India friendship. And this is exactly what we have achieved together today.
So extremely significant, moving from darkness unto light. I want to bring in Siddharth Zarabi once again. Siddharth, Geeta was of the view that America is likely to react very sharply to this. They would look at this as something like they wanted to impose sanctions on India for buying Russian oil. They put additional 25% sanctions. Scott Bessent said words to that effect. And Europe continues to buy oil. Europe does a trade deal with India. So will Europe now, will America back down? Or will America double down?
Well, you know, it is certainly something that US leaders will not be comfortable with. Remember, just months ago, they were asking the Europeans to join them in imposing harsh sanctions and tariffs on India. Clearly, the European and the American alliance, the transatlantic alliance that has worked well for so many decades, has broken. And why has it ruptured? It has ruptured because Europe today, just a year ago, and see how time has swung, is feeling threatened by America. Who could have imagined that American president would want to march on Greenland? Thankfully, he has ruled out a military conquest, at least so far, and that has really shocked the Europeans. I would go so far as to say that the key driver, the key reason for the Europeans to also move ahead, drop some of their stickier demands from India for the trade negotiation and vice versa, is the Trump factor. Of course, this is a agreement that almost came close to being done in 2021, and there were possibly previous instances as well. So in that sense, the United States reaction, would it take 50 to 100? Frankly, who cares today? And particularly today, in the last 12, 16 months, and Gaurav, I repeat that point, the number of trade deals and the pendulum's swing and the shift that we have ourselves done after, I would argue, several years of protectionism, I think also shows the great political flexibility and the systemic response authored by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It couldn't clearly have happened without him. So if we have given ground on automobiles, it shows that we have enough ground to give. And finally, one quick point, Gaurav, in terms of the nitpicking around the industrial impact.
Yes.
A trade deal can only be done between two parties where one party has something to sell, the other party has that to buy. If you look at the nature of the concessions that both sides have offered, that makes it a natural fit. Unfortunately, with the United States, the concessions that were being sought and what was being offered was completely imbalanced. So I guess that is a question that will continue to hang for some time, Gaurav.
And we'll be tracking that story very closely. Professor Chellaney, stay with me. I want to bring in my colleague Chetan Bhutani on the automobile sector, because Chetan, you cover automobile sector very closely. Are they cut up? Are they feeling let down? Or are they now mature enough? Because anyway, Volkswagen and Skoda are cars to, at least their lower end cars are being manufactured in India. So will they look at it as a challenge or an opportunity?
Well, it's clearly an opportunity for the Indian automobile sector, because remember, Gaurav, to busting a lot of myth that's been going online about, with immediate effect, cars like Mercedes-Benz, Skoda, Audi or BMW would get cheaper. In fact, it would not, because 95% of the cars are locally manufactured in India, because these companies particularly want to get the best of the Make in India initiative. But yes, cars beyond a certain threshold that are completely imported from these respective countries would definitely see a duty cut. The government of India currently taxes about 110% on these imported cars. That would be reduced to about 70% and with the next 5 to 10 years it would be reduced to 10%. But that would take time to reduce, because the government really wants to protect its Make in India initiative, because it has given a lot of stops already. The PLI scheme, the FAME scheme, which really protects these domestic manufacturers, and so does these German luxury companies who actually manufacture in India. So yes, we would see a whole lot of companies reducing prices, but not immediately, but in years to come, as and when the duty structure gets revised and eventually ratified. Lastly, Gaurav, very important to understand that to the electric vehicle there has not been much announcement, because the government has decided to protect its interest in the electric vehicle space to a very limited sector. So not much announcement coming in the electric vehicle space, but yes, for the super luxury cars probably going beyond 1.5 to 2 crores that have to be imported and do not get manufactured in India, that would get a price reduction only when the prices gets ratified.
Siddharth, the cars that common people buy, they would not be impacted in the manner in which some were fearing. They would continue to buy the cars at similar rates, or maybe hopefully better pricing. But I want to understand, what about wines? There was an argument that a lot of foreign wines will come into India, and this is where it would be a disadvantage to breweries in our country.
Well, who knew that Indian whiskies would consistently win awards for being the top whiskies globally? Did anyone imagine that a few years ago when the first such awards were being provided? I think we need to get out of a mindset of living in a well, and this is not towards any individual. The fact is that India's scale, the size of its market, and since you mentioned wine, It is not even a drop in the ocean of the vast alcoholic spirits of various strengths that India consumes. I think opening up doesn't matter. I am reminded of what a very, very senior official said about blueberries. He said, "Kitni blueberry aa sakti hai, kitne kha sakte hain." Yet you see protections being provided. Apples, for example, remain protected in most of the deals that we have done, including the New Zealand deal. Dairy, for example, imagine the changed global order. Gaurav, New Zealand is one of the foremost exporters and producers of various kinds of dairy products. We have protected our dairy industry there. So clearly, the item-wise discussion can seem to, at the headline level, be a giveaway. Yeah. But remember the point that Chetan made. There are 6,000 companies, European companies in India. As far as auto is concerned, all of them mostly get localized. The very, very top-end machines might get cheaper. But what is their annual consumption? A few dozen units, maybe 100 cars of 4 or 5 crore rupees sold if they are imported from Europe. How does that matter to the size and scale of India? I think the broader point here is that if there were to be higher FDI inflows as a consequence of this agreement, because one technical point, one of the strong points that I am seeing in this agreement is rules of origin. In simple terms, both the European Union and India have committed to each other that we will not promote and allow Chinese dumping. I think that is the broader significant message here, and not just the United States, Gaurav. China is also taking note of this agreement very, very closely. They may be inscrutable, they may not speak up so much, but they are taking equal, if not more, note.
No, very interesting. You should point that out, because that was my next question to Professor Brahma Chellaney. It's not just the United States that would be looking at this. China would be looking at this very closely, because since 2020, we've been hearing China +1. We've been saying that India could be that reliable alternative. China's reliability has always been an issue, and especially at crucial times. Is India prepared for it? Has India systematically prepared for it? Or do we see more words and less action, sir?
Well, as first on China, China is on a roller coaster, right? Because it's been, it has now achieved a $1 trillion plus trade surplus thanks to its avalanche of exports. The exports are going everywhere across the world, but also to India. And we have seen that from our own trade figures. China's trade surplus with India has been on the increase.
Yes.
But it's interesting to underscore what the EU, why is the EU so keen to develop this kind of partnership with India? Because it's seeking a foothold in the world's fastest growing major economy. And it also wants to de-risk its supply chain. So again, the China factor comes in the EU's calculations.
A reaction from Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's hailed the mother of all deals with the European Union. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said new avenues have opened up because of the India-EU FTA, and this deal will not just benefit India and the 27-member European bloc, but it will benefit the global community. The deal will help create quality jobs, mobility for our youth and our professional talent. And that's something that Ursula von der Leyen also spoke of when she said that there would be a gateway that is being created, India-EU gateway, a legal gateway office for Indian talent to move to Europe. And this includes students, researchers and highly skilled people, because our people are our greatest assets. Prime Minister Narendra Modi took to social media platform X to say this landmark deal between the second largest and the fourth largest economies of the world promises to create unprecedented opportunities and open new avenues of growth as well as cooperation. This deal will benefit the entire global community. It would help create quality jobs in key sectors, enable further mobility of our youth, professional talent, students and researchers, and unlock the potential of the digital age. Importantly, it will foster innovation, strengthen economic ties for mutual growth. Together, India and the European Union are moving ahead with trust and ambition towards a prosperous as well as a sustainable future. Listen in to Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he describes the India-EU deal as a partnership for global good.
हम साथ मिलकर आईमैक कॉरिडोर को ग्लोबल ट्रेड और सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट की एक प्रमुख कड़ी के रूप में स्थापित करेंगे। फ्रेंड्स, आज ग्लोबल ऑर्डर में बड़ी उथल-पुथल है। ऐसे में भारत और यूरोपियन यूनियन की साझेदारी अंतर्राष्ट्रीय सिस्टम में स्थिरता को मजबूती देगी। इस संदर्भ में आज हमने यूक्रेन, पश्चिमी एशिया, इंडो पैसिफिक सहित कई वैश्विक मुद्दों पर विस्तार से चर्चा की। मल्टीलेटरलिज्म और इंटरनेशनल नॉर्म्स का सम्मान हमारी साझी प्राथमिकता है। हम एकमत है कि आज के चैलेंजेस का समाधान करने के लिए ग्लोबल इंस्टीट्यूशंस का रिफॉर्म अनिवार्य है।
A partnership for global good. Professor Brahma, Chellaney, we'd also heard this about India-US. This was a partnership that both countries had cultivated over 25 years for global good post the Pokhran nuclear tests and the Kargil war. And, we've traveled that journey from NSSP to the current tensions. Now, do you see niggles even in India-EU, or this is far more reliable?
You raise a very good and fundamental question, Gaurav. Today, the EU and India have embarked on a shared project of economic resilience, strategic autonomy, and geopolitical balance. Like India, the EU is emphasizing the importance of strategic autonomy. But we should not forget the EU is an integral part of the Western bloc. There may be friction between the EU and the US today, but there's no structural or fundamental
Rupture.
divide between the two. It's the tensions and the friction have been caused by a whimsical US president. His term is limited. Once he leaves office, things may again go back to where they were before the Trump era. We should not forget that traditionally the white nations have banded together.
Yes.
So while India is the bridge in a divided world, seeking partnerships with various powers, we also need to be careful in terms of projecting our own future. Our own future depends on resilience, on being able to absorb shocks of various kinds.
And
but at
more
the same time, we should not shy away from building closer partnerships with different players, including the EU. The
last 30 seconds I have on this part of the show, Professor Chellaney, may I also draw your attention to India-EU talking about areas around the Indo-Pacific. Usually that was seen as a Quad subject, and specifically now India-EU are talking about this. So is the US retreating and EU moving in, or this is just tactical? Ultimately, the US would be back.
Well, only time will tell whether the US will be back, and certainly it has to be back because the Indo-Pacific is the core area for American interests. Is also core to international security. The future of international security will be determined not in Europe, not in the Middle East, but in the Indo-Pacific. So for Indian security, European security, or for American security, the Indo-Pacific is pivotal to our future. But it's interesting that the EU today in New Delhi is represented also by the European Council President, Mr. Costa, who's an Indian European.
Yes.
He's a person of Indian origin. He is an
Goa.
OCI holder.
Yes. And
an
he so
overseas
proudly
citizen of
showed
India.
his OCI card. It was so heartening to see that. You're absolutely right. And, this is something perhaps we'll continue to talk about. I'm sorry I've run out of time on this part of the show, Professor Chellaney, but from the Indo-Pacific to the Arctic are areas where conversations will continue in the days, weeks and months ahead. But the Prime Minister and Ursula von der Leyen both have described this as a deal which will benefit not just the people of the two countries and blocs, but also a partnership for global good.